Hey there you guys, what is going on? Welcome back to another video. If this is your first time on the channel, welcome. Today I'm going to be doing a video about what it's like, pros and cons of running both 700 pounds, which is considered heavy duty, front springs, and HD leaf packs, so they call that the heavy duty leaf pack. There's not a lot of videos out there that I've seen when I tried to look in advance of making this decision, so hopefully this is informative for you all and you guys can learn a little something or two from my experiences. Also, I didn't bring one with me, but I do have my new signature Quicksand Taco PVC patches available. So if you want to get your hands on one of those, just send me a message at Quicksand Taco on Instagram and I'll get you guys dialed there. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So a quick little backstory here as to why I'm making this video. I feel like a lot of times when people are building their overland or off-road Tacomas, they are so eager to get a lift, to throw bigger tires on there, whether that's 33s, 35s, 37s, that they forget about their long-term goals. Now, I made this mistake early on. I got a set of Bilstein 5100s. They were great, they rode awesome, but over time they begin to droop and sag due to all the weight. You consider the bed rack, 80 pounds, 10, 100 pounds. Each of these sliders here is about 80 pounds each. So everything really begins to add up. And as I've mentioned in a few of my other videos, if you haven't been watching for a while, I talk a lot about kind of being cognizant and mindful of all the weight that you add to your vehicle. So the second time I went around to do suspension, I was looking for a video like this one on what to consider when maybe upping the spring rate in advance of maybe adding all those bits of kit to your off-road vehicle. So I'm going to go over the front, talk about the springs up there, and then afterwards I'll talk about the Icon RXT leaf pack that I have in the back. All right, here out the gate we can see this is my Icon. I think altogether it's like a stage 10 or something like that. But the way I have it set up here is I have a 700 pound spring. For those of you who haven't seen what the stock springs look like, these coils are actually, let me see if I can zoom it in here, actually quite a bit thicker than the 600 and 650 pound springs. Now why that's important is because of the preload collar up here, and I'll zoom in again. Most of the time you'll see tons of people preloading the crap out of their front shocks to get the optimal amount of lift. And adding lift to the vehicle is good, but you don't want to compromise any of the components. So if you crank down the coil over to where you get enough space on top, like the preload that I was just showing you, I might drop in a clip here again, you're actually compromising the spring itself because the spring needs all the travel it can get. But as you can see here, I've done little to no adjustment to the preload. This is about a ½ an inch compared to the, people usually say, oh, 3 inches. You gotta make this, crank down this preload collar about 2 inches. And that is gonna drastically reduce the quality of the ride because the spring is already compressed. In this case, with a 700 pound spring, even before you add all the weight, you don't even need to adjust the preload at all because it's going to be already giving you the lift you need, and it's going to ride about as good, if not better, than when you had it cranked all the way down on 600 pound springs or 650. So yeah, that's kind of like the first thing I always think about is, okay, if now I'm getting the optimal amount of travel from the spring, and I'm not compromising or creating any coil bind, as it's called, where the coils actually touch each other, whether it's before or after you compress it on a bump or something like that. I'm now getting full droop up and down, up travel, down travel from those springs. Let me talk a little bit about the drawbacks here. So the drawbacks, I don't know how to put this in a polite way, but you can look all over the forums, all over, Instagram, and people will tell you, hey, 700-pound springs, you need a steel bumper, a winch, a ton of weight to make them actually ride nicely. And that's totally not the case. I don't have a winch, I don't have a front bumper. I put these on here in advance to stop myself from running into the same issue that I did the first time around. There's so many bugs up here. I don't know if you guys can even hear them. At any rate, I will tell you firsthand experience, if you plan to build out your truck, get 700-pound springs out the gate. It's going to save you tons of time later on down the road, especially if you're building with Icon, King, or Fox, any of those brands that will actually create rebuildable shocks. It's going to provide tons more articulation and versatility down the road without having to actually go in and fully replace everything you've kind of done to it. That said, they do run a little stiff. Now I come from, even before Tacoma's off-roading, Instagram, all that, I had lots of slammed Subarus and I was running them as low as possible. So I'm kind of used to like a little bit more of a stiff ride. And I kind of like that, especially for on-road, especially for dailying. If we're being honest, most of us are usually dailying their trucks. And people love King and Fox for their progressive dampening, as opposed to Icon, which is digressive, which means it's harder until you start hitting bumps and then it gets softer, whereas King and Fox, they're progressive, which means they're very cush on daily driving, and same with Fox. Which are really great brands as well. But so that's something to consider. If you're really scared to lose that factory, like how well the car drives stock, I'm sorry to tell you this, it's never going to ride that nice again. It's part of the build, it's part of the process. You're just going to have to cut corners here and there wherever you think makes the most sense. So again, as you can see here, and if you've been following along for a long time, this is no news to you. The only real weight I have up front is going to be marginal weight from the light bar, the tires, the skid plate in the front. I can get down there and show you that. I've talked about that in a other video, but for the most part, this is totally stock in the front. And for me, it rides awesome. You can see in there, I don't have any adjustment on my Icons. They're not the CDC or CCDV or whatever it's called. And that's the same for the back. I have the collar probably compressed about ½ inch, just enough to give myself the lift. And the clearance that I have here with the cab mount chop is probably a good angle for those of you who are curious as to all the work that went into that. Another whole video on kind of trimming to fit larger tires I can link down below. But that's pretty much everything that's kind of happening up here. Again, it really depends on what your future goals are. I'm planning to run a bumper here at some point in the near or maybe distant future. Who knows, we'll have to see. But for now, this ride's awesome for my personal needs. And when the time comes, I have plenty of preload to work with. And I won't be compromising anything. So that's kind of the front. Does it ride as good as stock? Absolutely not. Is it going to improve performance with a 700-pound spring versus compressing a 600-pound spring to the max just so you can get a 2.5, 3-inch lift? Absolutely. I think it's well worth it to do out the gate, to get that extra skew put in there, make sure you have what you need. And yeah, that's kind of my experience. I've been running these since July. In off-road, they don't perform any different than the Bilsteins. If anything, they perform better because they articulate better due to that spring and the rate that they're kind of rated for. So now we've kind of talked about the front. Now we're going to talk about the rear. I'll throw in some B-roll here of the Icon RXT Stage 3 leaf pack. They have 3 stages, option 1, 2, and 3, rated for, I think it's stock bed weight, 200 pounds and 600 pounds respectively. I currently have about 250, 300 pounds static load at all times. And let's see when this car goes by, it's always so loud. Sorry about that. But the reason I did this, and this is probably not news to anyone, is tons of times you will see Tacomas driving around with all this stuff on top and looks totally kitted out, but they got that bro lean where the back is totally leaning towards the rear. And not only does that not look good, in my opinion, but it also hinders performance. I think from a performance perspective, you need that drive line to be in line with what you're looking to achieve. Sorry, I'm always up here. There's tons of cars. At any rate, so what I've done is not only did I put the 700-pound springs up there in anticipation for a bumper and heavier weight that I won't have to deal with later on, but I also put the stage 3 or option 3 on the RXT leaf pack. What that essentially does is lifts the back much higher. You get a more forward rake, which I love, and I'll show you kind of what that looks like here in a sec. But it does come with, again, a few compromises. Not necessarily a reason not to do it, but a few compromises. So you can see here, in comparison to the front, which is already lifted about 2.5 inches, the rear is actually lifted a little bit higher right now, so that when more weight does get distributed to the back, it actually levels it out. And there's actually lifts, people would call them leveling kits. That's because the rear doesn't actually have anything back there. But with these Icon RXT leaf springs, I'm actually able to raise that to the point of, even if a bunch more weight is added, it's not going to affect the performance, lean, or looks of the vehicle. And I think it looks way better with the added spring rate back there. So with the pairing of the 700-pound springs and the Icon RXT leaf pack springs, you are going to notice that the rear, as well as the front, is going to ride a little bit rougher. But the great thing is, again, it doesn't ride too terribly. I would almost say it rides fine. But the more weight you add, even to the degree of filling up your gas tank when you're completely empty, is going to make the truck ride better than when it's empty. You start adding, gear for your trips, anything like that, you're actually going to get a better ride on a longer, camping trip or overlanding trip or just a day out on the weekend than you would if you just have an empty bed, which for the most part mine is when it's parked at home. So considerations: do you want it to perform well? Do you want to get the lift you need? Do you want to not have to spend double the money on replacing your suspension later on because that's kind of the nature of the build? The answer is probably no to all those if you're watching this video. So I can't recommend enough to kind of set yourself far enough in advance when you're building up suspension components to where you won't have to worry about the shortcomings of building the truck with, maybe it's just a 2-inch lift, a 1-inch lift, spacer lift. Any of those are totally fine. But from my experience, this is probably the way to go if I were to do it all over again. Another thing I wanted to bring up is, although I'm kind of demonstrating this on an Icon kit, you can get the 700-pound spring SKU number from any of the brands that you're looking to get if you want. The Fox shocks, the King shocks, any of those that kind of are rebuildable and have those either adjustment or remote reservoirs are going to have that option. So it's definitely something to look into well in advance. Another thing to consider is, maybe you don't get a full kit with all the same branding. I know a lot of people who talk very highly about Deaver. They make really large and heavy duty expedition sized leaf packs with, you know, upwards of 7+ springs to give you that full lift, especially if you have, you know, a topo topper camper, GFC, or even like a 4-wheel camper. Those are totally meant to hold the weight of a camper of that size. So those are definitely something to consider. At the same time, you don't want to overdo this. So I think for this specific example that I'm giving you with the RXT Leaf Pack, if you run a stage 3, you have a tent, bed rack, a few other minor things, like a roof rack and sliders, skids, you will be fine with the stage 3 option. I think it would be a pretty, I wouldn't say a pretty big mistake. It would be a mistake, I think, if you went this route and didn't get the option 3 out the gate. I think you're going to end up disassembling the leaf pack, throwing in an extra leaf for the option 2, and then you'll see that it begins to sag more, and then you'll get the option 3, and eventually you're like, hey man, I really wish I would have watched Nick's video. So yeah, it's not the only option out there, but for this specific application, this is exactly the look you want. Then maybe you want to get an Icon RXT leaf pack in the rear. You guys, that about does it. I'm gonna kind of wrap things up here because I just showed a clip. We got a storm running in or rolling through right now. It's been a big part of why I haven't been able to put out as many videos as I usually would like to, because one week California's flooded if you watch the news, and the next week it's sunny like it usually is. So it's been kind of tough to get out here and film some videos, let alone get out and do anything fun with a lot of the local trails being closed. Planning a larger trip with my wife here pretty soon, so we'll have to see how that goes. But yeah, if you want a patch, like I mentioned at the beginning, send me a direct message on Instagram. I'll get you guys hooked up with one of those. If this is your first time joining the channel, welcome. Hopefully this was informative. Tried to drop as much B-roll in as I could, because I know as much as people like to watch these videos, sometimes they just like to listen to them. I do that at work all the time. So I try to find a happy medium and be able to cater that to someone who wants to listen and watch. But at any rate, like I said at the very beginning, I could not for the life of me find a video that kind of addressed what I talked about here today. Hopefully this was informative. If you disagree with anything I said, please let me know. I'm open to any and all, you know, choices, decisions, or opinions based on what I've talked about here. But yeah, of course, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment down below. I'll for sure get back to you. Like this video, it totally helps support and drive the channel in a positive direction. And as always, enjoy the ride.